So we'll call the meeting to order at 4:16. And do we need to have introductions? We know who
Yep,
we all
you-
are, right?
You can feel free to do so since
Okay.
this is a recording and
Okay, I'm Jane Saran Pine, and at the moment, I'm head of this committee because of our meeting the last time, which was not recorded. And to my left is Renee Grover, also of Waldeboro, and to my right is Freeman Zausner of Waldeboro. And directly across from me is Max
John Stone.
John Stone. So Max, you were going to say something to start us off
Right, so
about our last meeting.
The last meeting wasn't recorded, but I do have minutes that I didn't have a chance to format yet and then have distributed yet. The first meeting was more of an introduction for the members of the committee. Unfortunately, two of the members, the same two who aren't here, weren't at that first meeting. So we're just going to proceed as is with getting what our direction for this committee down, and just some updates that are happening in the legislature, and trying to get a better idea of what we want to do and handling the scope of this.
Have we been formally charged by the select board as what, and what is that? Did that come in a letter or a memorandum?
Freeman, I believe you were at the meeting, correct, when the select board
I think it was just the motion.
to reestablish the marijuana committee for medical marijuana purposes.
And,
To see within the scope of Maine law, if there was any within the, and as this document says, within the permissible local regulatory powers given by the state, and of course there are many that are not, would the town want to establish any local rules beyond the state rules within the limits set by the state? For example, one of the main limits is you cannot regulate either the number of caregivers, for example. That would be something the town cannot do,
Mm-hmm.
of registered caregivers.
Yes. And just so you three know, the handout that I provided you was something that I received from a Maine Municipal Conference that I attended recently, where the staff attorney, Rebecca McMahon, spoke about recent marijuana legalization updates. And the page specifically that everyone has is just a quick summary of adult use marijuana, medical marijuana regulations. And then on the bottom is a piece of legislation that went into effect on September 19th that defined what a caregiver retail store is. That was something that was lacking in the recent update LD 1539 that took effect last December. So just some points on that. It's pretty much associating a caregiver retail store as what a regular retail store would be: fixed location, a sign, regular business hours, accessibility to the public, sales of goods directly to the consumer, and used by a registered caregiver to offer marijuana for sale to patients.
And our understanding is there's only two of those that are currently operating that have municipal approval. One that has municipal approval that doesn't seem to be operating as a retail store,
Correct.
right?
which are those two?
So one would be Highbrow. The one you're speaking about,
Cider Hill is the other one that's operating.
right? And then the last one is at the top of the hill where the vape shop was operating.
Right.
That half of the store was approved, and they did meet their patients, so they do have a back office, but they are no longer a
In terms of this, they're not an operating
correct.
retail store, and these are grandfathered, cannot be stopped. But Other than that, the town, to have any additional ones, the town would have to approve any additional, this definition, the town would have to
Yes.
approve this.
Well, first the town would have to opt in to allow such a business.
Yes, and then approve it, right.
yes,
And the town is not opted in.
correct.
So tell me again about the store at the top of the hill. It's no longer operating, is that correct?
Correct. So they received approval, I
So-
think, August, well, it's a complicated story. So in August 8th of last year, they received planning board approval to operate a store similar to Highbrow,
Mm-hmm.
where they would have their non-cannabis items in the front, and in the back, they would meet their patients. Now, they have documentation and have been verified by the state's marijuana, Office of Marijuana Policy. They have been meeting their patients in their back room since that approval date. But they have not opened as a retail store. So they don't have that exemption anymore, but they still meet their patients in the back room.
So they're no longer a retail store?
Correct. But they do meet their patients. Again, it's a weird gray zone area that I did check with with Rebecca McMahon.
Mm-hmm.
I made sure to approach her afterwards and say, this is all the stuff that's happened. Are they allowed to still operate? And just citing this document, just citing what defines a caregiver retail store, she says, as long as it's an office, as long as they don't have their business name, as long as they don't have all these other items to it, and they're just meeting their patients in the back room, like they have been doing since, I think August 23rd is when they started having receipts, then they're fine to operate there, just meeting their patients and only their patients. Now, I'm fine talking about this. However, I feel one negative that happened at the last meeting was that, well, you can see it right now, I don't know how we're planning on going forward, what our end goal is, what we're trying to achieve with this, because we only mentioned what the goal was, and that is to getting some regulation or talking about medical caregiver regulations in town if we want to do so. But what does that mean exactly for this
Well, in
committee?
the select board meetings, there were two issues that were discussed that actually led to this committee being started. One discussion was John Lawrence and Marcia Smolin, who wanted to have some regulatory action
Mhm.
by the town on registered caregivers,
Mhm.
not stores, on caregivers.
Yes.
And
Some action,
meaning regulation, the municipally permitted regulation by the state, which could be, for example, distance from a school, for example, as one example.
Mhm.
They wanted some regulations on that. And there was one other thing they mentioned, will come back to me. And the other discussion independent of that was this gap in our land use rules, which had to do with section DD, which was correct at the time, but now by new state legislation is probably not what the town would want.
Mhm.
And therefore, in some way, either in this committee or otherwise, of actually putting an ordinance out that would eliminate that section and then restore this to a true opt-in for dispensaries.
Okay, I was about to make sure you're talking about medical marijuana dispensaries.
Everything is medical marijuana. There's nothing I'm talking about that's not medical marijuana.
No, I mean just for that land use ordinance
Yes,
section.
it's only
That's-
medical marijuana dispensaries.
Yes.
Right.
That's just what I needed to
Right, so those were the
clarified.
two discussions that led to this committee
Forming.
being formed.
Okay. The reason I say that is because for amending the land use ordinance to eliminate dispensaries, that is something that I do have waiting, and the reason I haven't been able to put it on a ballot or warrant is because the planning board, since it's a zoning issue, the planning board will have to hold a hearing at some point to approve of these changes or make the recommendation for
Aren't
aren't
change.
they both zoning issues?
Well, the one with the dispensary is in the land use ordinance already.
Right,
So
but-
we are amending the land use ordinance
right, I
as
understand
is.
that, but also just the one example that you gave of distance from a school for a caregiver would also be in the
that's-
land, wouldn't that also be
If we're choosing.
before the planning
If
board?
that's not gonna go into the land use ordinance and we're creating a separate marijuana ordinance for that, then no, we probably won't.
But we could.
We could if you want.
What does MMA suggest? Do they have any guidelines on this?
MMA, well, I haven't discussed anything for that first part of the scope. The only times I've really spoken with them have been relating to the dispensary. They always suggest when we have something ready and done to then speak with our own town attorney for what they suggest and what they propose. That's something I would prefer to wait and do when we have a document to show them first, before we decide to either squeeze it into the land use ordinance or make it its own.
So if it were its own,
Mhm.
and we're just sort of moving towards what the scope of this committee is going to be, I think we touched on last time, but I'm not sure. Do we have an understanding of what other towns have done so that we can look at that? In
Not
terms of a
really.
marijuana,
But we do,
It's all very brand new right now.
but we do have, it's in my card, and bringing it, we do have proposed ordinances from places like Grays, a lot of ordinances.
like what?
I think of the Grays is Gray, Maine, Grays, Grays, one of the, wasn't that
Gray.
town?
Gray.
Gray?
Yeah, I know
Gray.
there's Gray.
So I have in my thing, I think, two towns, their regulatory proposals for regulating medical marijuana registered caregivers. It's in the car.
Mm-hmm,
And we may not have time today, I can always get it, but,
mm-hmm.
so there is
Is
stuff
it
out-
lengthy?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
And there is stuff out there, but you can see the summary, and
Mhm.
to me, it's a little overdone, I mean, but it's there, it's pretty exhaustive. And some of it might, and again, the other issues, we talked about is vested rights, some of it could only apply to new entrants because it would violate vested rights.
Mhm.
So just going back to dispensaries,
Yes.
I do have the summary of suggested amendments that would be done to the land use ordinance to effectively opt us out of allowing a dispensary in Waldeboro. That's something that we can discuss at possibly the next meeting. It won't, the proposal won't be on the next, the ballot in November, but we can try and at least aim for the vote in June, if that's acceptable. There's more than enough time to have that discussion.
My suggestion is, because that's the most straightforward, is we should try to get that off our plate as soon as possible so that you.
But also, that is not the whole point of this meeting, is to
No.
talk about ballots and trying to
No.
eliminate.
But what I'm saying, for at least a schedule or timeline, we would need to have, if hypothetically, if we were to at least suggest something to the select board for these
Mhm.
rules, that would have to go to the town, because I'm assuming we want a town-wide vote. We don't want a special meeting that happens at one time or people at night. I believe the cutoff date to have something given to the select board and have them approve it would be, and I'd have to confirm this with Jody over there, would either be April 12th or March 12th. I'd have to confirm that. I'd have to confirm which one of those two dates. I think it's April, though.
I would
So-
say that there's a time issue because the town has a moratorium, and the purpose of the moratorium is to give the time, reasonable amount of time to put this to the voters en masse. And so if we don't move it, then we keep extending the moratorium
Well-
without the voters having a chance to make a decision.
The moratorium was more of a focus for the dispensaries. So that's why I personally would love to get the dispensary, same with what Freeman just said, I would love to get the dispensary item off the plate. That's, because that is what the moratorium's focus is on right now. But as for the caregivers that I'm hoping to talk about more at length, that is something I do not want to try and push for April. I think that's something that we should either see, I mean, depending on how many meetings we have,
Mhm.
that's something a year or 2021 even. Because I think we want to make sure it's done properly. We don't want to rush something to the voters. I think we can all agree on that. But Renee, you are correct that ballot talk, we should.
Maybe I was just misinformed on what the whole
We are.
scope of this
Well,
committee was.
We're making recommendations to the select board.
But we're only gonna focus on the dispensary?
The dispensary is something that has been meant to be done for, I think, quite a while now. That's something that's what I was initially asked to take care of back in
Gotcha.
December, just to get that off of the zoning.
Mm-hmm.
The caregivers who either operate in the back offices, non-domicile ones specifically, that is where I think the select board would like some input or recommendations if we should have any rules or regulations on them. If we are to suggest something, anything that's said at this committee should only come as a recommendation to the select board.
Mhm.
We are not putting anything on the ballot.
Right.
We are making a suggestion to the select board.
And if we delayed on the dispensary, even just talking about it, the select board has every right to take it up whenever they want without us. We're
Yes.
merely advisory, so they could take it up this meeting and
Mhm.
put it through without even us having one word on it.
And the other thing that could happen is we could make a suggestion and they could ignore it,
Mhm.
Yes.
which has happened in the past, for sure.
So
So,
so I do want to go with Renee's logic on this or at least way of thinking of it. We shouldn't be thinking of ballots. We shouldn't be thinking of getting things done immediately. We should just talk about these and make sure that we at least want to have something and then work from there. It's anything that would be a ballot issue would be down the road, but we shouldn't try and rush these dates.
Well, we agree on that.
Is there an understanding on that?
Mhm.
With, in my mind, the proviso, with respect to the regulation of registered caregivers,
Mm-hmm.
I do think that we should, as a citizen, forgetting this meeting, I think as a citizen, we've looked at the moratoriums enough. I think we should aim for next June for this one, for the land use change,
Is that just for the dispensaries?
just for that. I think the date you mentioned is one we should, the town, forgetting this
Yes.
committee, the town should strive to meet that.
Yes, and I will, and if that just means one meeting just to look at it, so that this committee can give their approval for it, I'll then give that to the planning board for their required hearing of it. The select board will then have it, and we will hopefully have this done in June. But that is dispensaries. Let's focus on caregivers now, shall we?
Mhm.
it sounds great in terms of getting rid of that, if we can
Yes.
move that off our plate. Because it sounds to me, I know from what we were talking about the last time too, I have it will take me a while to fully understand all of what is going on and what has gone on in terms of the scope of the medical caregivers, and what we can and can't do, and what we, what we would even recommend, even if we would recommend anything. I have no opinion on that, because I don't feel that I'm educated enough. I think we even talked about the last time you suggested, I think, Freeman, that maybe Renee, we could start with you helping us to understand more of what you see the parameters are and what you see, if you see any problems that.
I think
that-
I mentioned at the last meeting, making sure that people are growing safely and making sure that they have the right electrical service for what they're trying to do and security measures at their home and,
Slow, sorry, these are all good. Go slower.
Wait,
a lot of fires are caused by underpowered grow facilities that they have good intentions, but, you have to make sure that they're safe and not gonna burn people's houses down or the train depot or any other nice historic features here in Waldoboro.
Is that what
Um,
happened to that building? Somebody was growing in the building and
Mhm.
they didn't have the right.
Probably.
Which building was this?
Do you know? Do you know
It's a
over
nice
on
old
Route
building.
1, when you're going over the bridge, there's that reddish building that's just down
Right on the tracks.
Which direction around one?
left. If
Right,
you're
right
go-
across
if you're,
from Moody's.
if you're
the
going
little
to
Yeah, yeah,
Rutland,
yeah.
yeah, that one. Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
So they didn't have sufficient
I'm
fire.
not sure. I'm
No, I know,
not sure
but-
exactly
but-
what happened, but more than likely, they did not have,
Fire suppression that was adequate.
or
Or-
probably, really more than likely, it was either an equipment issue or a power issue.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's hard to get things like that down on paper in terms of if your end goal is to have some kind of ordinance. I mean, in terms of electrical service or underpowered electrical service, how are you gonna define that and have that be a way that people can understand it?
mhm.
Which was one of the reasons why I was asking about the Maine Municipal, if they had any guidelines on anything like that. Or some of the other towns that you mentioned.
They didn't-
If
they
those
went
are
back-
issues that they addressed.
They actually, I didn't see this, it's very sophisticated. So this is why you need to educate us, because you're doing this and probably doing better than anybody else. So I love Saran's question, how would you actually, I mean, how do you spec out how many amps on the board? I mean, how do you do this?
I
Well,
don't know.
I mean,
Because your knowledge is,
every
Prac-
caregiver
Yeah.
is different. You know, I mean, we all grow differently, we all have different equipment, but basically it's all the same. You know, I mean, if with, with caregivers, you know, you could say, you know, you need to have a separate electrical supply for your grow building, separate from your residence. I mean, you could put that in the town, whatever, you know, because people who are sharing power with their house to their grow, if it's just a 200 amp residential service, it's really not a whole lot of power for, you know, a grow that is greater than like one room for a caregiver. Also, you know, the town could also propose that if you don't own the property, you have to have explicit writing documentation from the landowner, you know, so that people don't come in here and rent, like the train depot, and start growing marijuana and burn it down. There's a lot of things that the town can do just to make it more safe, especially like helping the residents, you know. You can't always control if you're renting to somebody what they're doing, because you don't know.
Let me ask an ignorant question. So in our stores, we had to get a certificate of occupancy,
Mhm.
and it specified what we could and couldn't do.
Mhm.
And if we wanted to do something different, we had to go back and amend the CO. So, but I'm totally ignorant. Is that something in this town where you say let's say my home, and then someone wanted to, let's say I moved down and want to rent it, and they want to do a grow facility, do they need to amend their certificate of occupancy? I don't know, I'm talking out of pure ignorance. How would you, that's a change in use. How does that work with what you're saying?
I'm
Well,
not really sure.
well, whenever, I'm just speaking for the land use ordinance, what I have for the businesses portion of it. If there is ever someone, you do have to prove that what you are doing is fine with the owner of the property. So if you own the property, you just need to show the title of the deed, which some deeds say you can't do this, you can't do that. But for some people who are leasing part of the land, we do require a letter of support from the owner of the property that
Okay, but
we
let's
ask
say,
for them to, and we
Right.
ask for them in that letter to say, we know that they want to do this business and we are fine with that.
but let's say the owner is ignorant, I'm ignorant, and I have a 100 amp service, and it really is gonna require 400 amps, you know,
Mhm.
for an operation. So I'm the owner, oh yeah, fine, but it's not the same as having a professional engineer come in and spec it, you know, right, which is what I would do even when I was in my heating
Mhm.
system, and say, you can or cannot do this, Freeman Salzner. It's not the same as an owner who may not have any knowledge.
Well,
I'm not sure what can be done and what can't be done, but, you know, you could just say a minimum of a 200 amp service, you know, because 100 amp service isn't gonna cut anything, no
But
matter,
so, is it possible though that, for example,
unless it's LED.
a 200 amp would be insufficient in some situations?
In some situations,
So
200 amps
would you
is
base it on the
insufficient.
square footage of the area, of the growing area?
Yes,
You would?
but nobody can go in and verify how big the area is because nobody but elected officials are allowed into a grow facility.
So, what? So what? You still have to comply.
Or if you get caught, then, you know, you're kind of in violation.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm only speaking from personal experience. I melted half my service off my house. 200 amp service, had to put in a 400 amp service, everything was fine. But
I've
Yeah.
never even heard of 400 amp service, so.
it's just commercial
So,
service. Most
yeah.
businesses have
Uh-huh.
400 commercial service. But I'm also a multi-caregiver grow facility, so I have more than one room.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
So, if I can just go ahead and make a proposal for
Mhm.
how future meetings can be conducted,
Mm-hmm.
what I would like to propose is we would do these meetings where you all would say what you're looking for in this possible ordinance or rules. For example, Renee's focus on certain amp levels and like THC levels. There was a few things you got in there, and I'm not going to get every single item.
that's okay.
But
You know, you could require that any caregiver has their product laboratory tested.
Mhm.
The state has kind of dropped the ball.
So-
I'm not really sure what the state's doing right now, but
And so that's what I mean.
yeah.
And that can be what's discussed next
Mhm.
month when I have it all in writing,
Yeah.
possibly looking at what other towns have required with a combination of some suggestions you or other members of this committee have, as said at this meeting. I'll put it together, and then at that next meeting, we can spend some time looking over it to see if it's what everyone was expecting.
Mhm.
And then the latter half of the meeting can be what the next section will be. So zoning or distances from schools, something like that.
Or churches.
Or
I mean,
churches.
you know, I'm all for that.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, being a caregiver, it's kind of a moral,
Mm-hmm.
a moral insight of, oh, do I really want to start a grow facility, you know,
Right there.
within 500 feet of a church? I personally wouldn't, out of respect, but some people would, you know, so that's something else that this committee could recommend, just like along with the schools,
Mhm.
you know.
What else would you teach us, I mean, about security? Like, what is the security regulation could be or might be?
The state already requires caregivers to have a hardwired security system and cameras. So there's not really much more that we could suggest unless you want everybody to get like a German Shepherd or a Doberman. You know, I mean, the buildings have to be secure. Whether people are being compliant or not is a whole nother question.
So, and that's something that you talked about the last time too, and I would like to explore how we could require compliance and ensure that we have compliance. And
And that would be part of this document where we would be creating,
mm-hmm.
where how the enforcement, the range of it, and what would be allowed under state law. And that's something that I would also be having some back and forth conversations with Maine Municipal Association, and then at the end we'd have it confirmed by the town attorney.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I'm proposing for how to conduct these future meetings. I'll
Mhm.
write something between now and next meeting, or I'll say the next meeting, where I will do something. I guess the focus will be on safety related items if everyone's fine with that, or it can be zoning. Whichever one you all would like me to tackle first. And then whatever I don't do this month, I'll just do next month. And when we're meeting here, we'll go over what's proposed. You'll make your recommendations, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Is that acceptable how I'm proposing this?
Yeah, but I do want Renee to teach us, because I'm learning things here I never even thought about. I didn't think about these issues, which is why it's good to have you on the committee.
So that'll bring me to however we want to look at this agenda of meeting schedules.
Okay.
So it was proposed, yeah, go ahead.
Could we find out, I know we have another meeting scheduled for the third Monday this time in November, don't we? Or,
I don't recall saying
okay,
that.
we didn't, I think we were talking about the third Monday
Probably.
in each month. There would
Yes.
be a
Oh,
meeting. Get it? So, but because Ted and Amanda have not attended the last meeting or today's meeting, I think we need to be sure that
We can get them here.
we can get them here. And the other thing, what we should do, what I should do, or you and I should coordinate, Max, is making sure a week before that we remind everybody that it's
Okay.
next,
I
the
will do,
date, the time, that kind
I'll
of thing.
make sure to do that for the next meeting.
Exactly the right thing.
Um,
Steve Schiff is clearly
So,
a stunningly dishonest person.
well,
who
that,
has lied consistently now.
Was that a robocall?
am I
Freeman?
supposed to be saying turn off your cell phones during these meetings now?
What's this?
Am I supposed to be saying turn off your cell phone during the meeting?
I can't, but it won't go off.
Go into the next room and you can handle it there.
Crazy.
Doesn't sound good, Freeman.
So, what I
So-
was going to,
Yes.
well, I think what was being suggested
Right.
was doing 2 meetings a month.
Oh, right.
And then
It's-
what we can do is one for the second meeting of the month, I suppose this will be, for the second meeting of the month, we can do ordinance or not ordinance, regulation required stuff, things that I'm gonna do in the back office. And then for the first meeting of the month, it can be more of an educational meeting. So talking about things that are happening in the state legislature, as well as some experiences from Renee, and as well as more of her 2 cents, and
Mm.
helping educate the committee, as well as whoever's watching this right now, about some state laws as well.
And deciding if we need to bring in anybody else. I
Yes.
know the last go-around, we did bring in the
Some-
police, we
Mhm.
brought in people from the schools. I mean, I know there were totally different issues in a lot of ways, but, you know, maybe we'll need an electrician come in, or a fire suppression person.
Well, and then
or-
you get into, I mean, going from a 200 amp service to a 400 amp service.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess if they really want to grow that badly,
Mhm.
they'll put it in.
Mhm.
But, you know, basically what I'm saying is like the caregivers that have like one room, or if it's a multi-caregiver site, you know, once you get past like one room on a 200 amp service, it gets a little dangerous, you know. I
Mhm.
mean, these lights, depends on, you know, LED lights don't put off as much power, they don't use up as much power,
Mhm.
but like my lights, I have, you know, 9 1,000 watt light bulbs in one room, so
Mhm.
it's a lot of power.
So is there any pollution of any kind too?
I don't believe so.
Like,
CMP loves me, you know. I mean, my CMP bill a month is, woo. You would have thought I got power back a little bit faster than I did, but, you know. It's
Right.
just one of those things, like, if people want to be a caregiver and they're just, it's a residence that they're renting or leasing or whatever, you should just require to have explicit letter from the landlord.
Mhm.
They know, because a lot of landlords don't know. They
right.
don't. They can't control what their people do as soon as they're in there.
Mhm.
And of course, we all know that tenants have more rights than the landowners. So, you know, it's very hard to regulate stuff like that. So at least if there's something on the books about a 200 amp minimal service to be a caregiving grow facility, then that might eliminate a few
Problems.
places or problems, you know, especially downtown. Like, you know, if somebody has an apartment, they just decide to
Start growing.
start growing, then no, you can't. You know, you don't have your own 200 amp service. You can't do that.
All right.
You know, it would keep it out of the apartment buildings, probably most I don't know what mobile homes have for service, if it's a 200 amp service or smaller. I
Well,
don't
it
even
could
know
be
if they're smaller
dangerous.
anymore,
Yeah.
you know.
So, is this proposed meeting schedule fine with everyone here?
So you're saying 2 times a month, each meeting is an hour.
It can be an hour, yes.
An hour would be good. We're not sure the time or the dates at this point because of Amanda and Ted.
Correct.
But
Ted told me that he's fine with whenever we're holding meetings, as long
Mhm.
as he's given advance notice.
Mhm.
So I'm sure he'll be fine with what time we choose. Amanda, I do not know. But she says she can make the meetings that would happen on the third Mondays. So
Mhm.
even if she can't make these information session meetings, I think she can still contribute a good amount to the committee.
Mhm. And so the first meeting is educational, is that what you were saying, or do I have it backwards?
Well, that's what I'm proposing. If that's
What's that? I'm sorry. I had
Mhm.
So, I assume for our meetings, we want to keep the third Monday at 4 p.m. as
Mhm.
we're doing right now. This would be when we're talking about local rules and regulations. What we
Mhm.
want to, what we're making suggestions to the select board to keep in mind
Mhm.
if they were to go forward with rules. Now, if we want to have a second meeting of the month, it can be. I'm assuming it's going to be a bit earlier than that one. So, either the first or second Mondays of the month,
Mhm.
which
Well,
I would.
I just kind of propose 2 meetings a month because we do
Mhm.
have some people who aren't very educated.
Right.
And we spend a lot of time discussing just the main print,
Yes.
initial gettings of medical marijuana and then,
And that's what I would like to dedicate at least a meeting to, just so that there
Sounds
is
good to
this public forum as well, and so that we're not in a 1 hour span. We're not trying to cram all these local rules and regulations
Mhm.
with items that many of us don't know. So I think keeping these to as separate meeting items would help get through some of the gunk in this.
My one other suggestion would be that when we look at let's say what the other towns have done,
Mm-hmm.
before we even get to whether we would do it, I would want you to just go through and give your reaction. It'll still be a teaching to look at it and say, okay, well, this looks interesting, maybe, no, because
I don't want to tell you too much because like Auburn requires a $5,000 a year town fee and I'm like, oh God, I'm not paying that.
Well, and that-
Just
But
kidding.
that would be the point. In other
Right.
words, before I even get to what I'm even thinking of,
Yeah.
I'd want to just go through a template and then have you discuss each one, like,
Mhm.
it'd still be educational, because I think Saran's right. We have to really understand how operators operate before we can actually start to think about how we want to do anything.
Exactly.
And I don't know how operators are, like you taught me something, and I know what a 4 amp service is, I know what 800 amp service is.
Mhm.
I'm proud that you have a 400 amp,
Mhm.
but I never would even have thought of this.
Yeah.
So you're teaching me things that we need to know.
I learned from all the bad mistakes I've made, basically that's about it.
So I still would like to at least try this method where I'm only focusing on one specific section. I'll look at the town rules that have already been implemented in some areas, whether it's Gray or I think Hallowell has some rules, or Auburn, and see what they have said for that specific section. So in terms of safety, or we'll just say amps, they may have just done whatever the state says, or there might be one town that has even talked about it, and at that point I can adapt that to whatever standards we want to adopt, and just have a basic idea. And if we want to talk about it more, we can. Obviously, when we have the finished product, we'll go through it again and see if there's any changes that, now that we've talked about this 2 months after we initially talked about that, maybe we should make some updates to it.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. So I'd at least like to try it for maybe the first month, just to at least have something, just to, I guess, start, is what I'm saying. So,
Sounds good to me. So what are we starting with the next meeting, and when are we gonna have the next meeting? November
up to you.
4th is 2 weeks from today.
mhm.
November 4th, I will not be here. without me.
Uh,
I'm taking my first vacation in 15 years.
Oh,
No, that's
good.
fine.
I'm
That's
going.
good. I hope you're
Well,
going someplace nice.
And just because we pick a time doesn't mean it has to be, like, if we pick the first or second Monday of next month, doesn't mean we have to immediately start it next month. It can be,
Okay, well, the
Wait,
the Monday
December.
after that is Veterans Day, so that's a
Yes.
holiday. The Monday after that would be the 18th, and
which
that,
would be when we're,
which is the
here.
third Monday.
Yep.
And I may be a little late, but I'll be here.
the discussion of a second meeting can also be brought up at the next meeting as well, if we want to, because I kind of feel bad if we just make this meeting decision without Ted and Amanda here.
Yeah,
I know Ted is very relaxed of whatever date it would be, but I do wish Amanda could at least give her thoughts on it.
Mhm.
So I can send an email to her and hopefully get a response.
Could you copy us too?
Yes.
That'd be good. And Freeman, you're going to, by the next meeting, let us know about the Lincoln County News article that you saw?
I just looked, and it's just for Damascotta.
Is it Denver? Can,
I mean, it doesn't, I don't think it has anything to do with Waldeboro.
Oh, so it's Damascotta, but I did see your
Yes,
name.
yes.
Okay.
You saw my name?
wait,
I
what?
thought I'll go look this up.
You're
Yeah.
gonna have to, because
We're-
now I'm curious.
We'll see there's a printed copy in the back, so we'll just see that in a minute. Okay.
So we're shooting for the 18th at 4 o'clock?
18th will probably be our next meeting unless someone
Mhm.
wants to propose an earlier date.
No, that's fine with me. And I just thought there was like some major rush to get this stuff done for.
No.
Yeah,
no,
okay,
no,
so
we do
that's
not-
why I was like, oh, let's have 2 meetings a month, but, you know, that's fine.
We're not in any rush. I think we just want to
To
make sure-
work on it and be sure
Yeah.
we continue to do that.
And to let you guys know, I will be doing another medical marijuana 101 class again at my store. So if you would like me to let you know, so you guys can come and
When do you-
listen
do you have a
in.
date?
that?
Yeah.
I don't know yet.
Okay.
But it's in the
Everything's a little
future.
crazy, but it's probably in November sometime.
Okay.
So it's usually Wednesday night I do it. And the last one lasted like 2 hours and, you know, it was fun.
So is CMP giving you award points for your vacation?
They should. They certainly should. I'm just excited. I'm like, well, my CMP bill's not gonna be that high this month because I had 3 days off, so, you know, but.
All right. Well,
Okay. And we have no one from the public here,
no one from the
but maybe
public.
we will in the
And then
future. Once
there's-
we get going, we will probably.
And then all that's left is new business and comments from the committee, so
I think we're set. Are we set?
Mhm.
Freeman? Yes? Okay. Motion to adjourn?
Seconded?
Seconded? There we go.
Aye.
Okay. 4:59.